Restituemus imperium Romanum, et omnia alia falsa imperia comburem. That means subscribe to Ludi for eternal salvation. Totally doesn't mean that we're gonna restore the Roman Empire and burn all the other false empires. I wouldn't ever say such a thing. However, I am gonna explain to you today the history of the Italian peninsula with all of its different entities in 1337, whilst at the same time obviously going through the latest Tinto maps that show us how exactly EU5 is going to interpret the Italian peninsula. Pavia once again enriches our knowledge of this secret project, whatever it might actually be, right? And today's focus is on the Italian peninsula, which is honestly absolutely delicious. There's so many different nations which have insanely unique flavor and have such a pivotal moment in their history. I feel like 1337 is by far the best choice they could have ever made for a start date for this game. Pavia says the situation in Italy in 1337 is quite interesting, and I fully agree. The main power in the peninsula is the Kingdom of Naples, who was ruled by King Robert I, who is also the ruler of Provence. What Pavia doesn't say is that King Robert of Anjou, that indeed ruled over Naples and Provence, ruled since 1309 up until 1343, and he was part of the Angevin domain, meaning that he had deep ties with what was going on in France. And I suspect that we're going to see something along those lines, maybe expressed as a situation when the game comes out, who's to say. Now, if we are being technical, the Kingdom of Sicily, despite actually being ruled by Frederick III, of D'Arago as he was called, but technically the house was of Barcelona, the reason why the game itself portrays him as the Arago and why he was actually a part of the Barcelona household is because it was actually customary, especially within the Iberian lands, especially for the Aragonese kings. Doesn't matter what their actual dynasty was, they would take a sort of I would say in modern terms nickname, maybe, because it wasn't the actual name of the household, but it's basically what everybody was calling them, so they would have more of a legitimacy to being the ruler of that particular crown. So yes, portraying them as the Arago in EU5 is actually accurate, even though they were of the House of Barcelona. Frederick III actually ruled between 1296 in the Kingdom of Sicily and obviously Aragon and so on, and he actually passed away in 1337. I'm not sure if it's June or July, but I think it was June. So considering the game starts in April 1337, we should still see Frederick III as the leader in charge of the Kingdom of Aragon and all of its other multiple possessions around Italy, around the Balkans, and so on. Pavia also mentions that Robert I of Naples also had some minor countries that he ruled in northern Italy. His efforts towards the domination of Italy also made him the leader of the Guelph faction in Italy, which backs the Pope. Now, if we scroll a little bit down, we see here the two factions, the Guelphs and the Ghibellines. This right here is the Guelphs factions, which includes the Papal States and a variety of other nations, and the Ghibellines are the rest in the north that are highlighted right now. So what are the Guelphs and the Ghibellines? Well, basically the Guelphs would support the Papal States as the ultimate authority within the Italian peninsula. The Ghibellines would support the Holy Roman Emperor as the ultimate authority within the Italian peninsula. So that's basically a very summarized explanation of the Guelphs versus Ghibellines. Speaking of him, the seat of the Curia is in Avignon. That is correct. Up until 1377, if I'm not mistaken, Avignon is where the seat of the papacy was, and this eventually caused the Western Schism because eventually one of the popes wanted to move the seat of the papacy back to Rome, and there was a pope elected in Avignon, another pope elected in Rome, and then another pope elected by a third party. I don't remember where, but I think it was Siena. If I'm not, let me know in the comment section if I'm wrong. I think it was Siena, maybe Pisa, not Siena. I think it was Pisa that elected the third pope, actually. One of the Florentine cities in any case. Tuscan cities, whatever you want to call them. Anyway, so that was the Western Schism, again, in a very nutshell situation, because I'm not getting to the history part. We're just giving a brief overview of the Dev Diary before I actually talk about the historical bit. Regaining control over the Papal States, moving it back to Rome, might take some time and effort. Opposite to all of that, there is the Ghibelline faction led by the Signoria of Milan, ruled by the Visconti dynasty. They are backed by other important powers in the Italian region, such as the superb Republic of Genoa, the Duchy of Verona, ruled by the dynasty of Della Scala. I talked about this, I think, in my previous Tinto Talks video or 2 videos ago. There's also neutral powers like the Republic of Venice and Siena, although they can be be attracted to join one of the factions. We also have foreign powers that have already set a foothold in Italy, such as the Crown of Aragon, which has established a branch of its dynasty as the Kings of Sicilia, whilst also recently conquering some lands in Sardinia, which eventually end up with Aragon conquering the rest of Sardinia as time went on. Now, we did talk a little bit about Naples and the papacy and so on, but let's talk about the other major players within the Italian peninsula before we go through the rest of the Dev Diary, because the 1300s or 14th century, better yet, is the moment in which the Renaissance started, and it started in the Italian peninsula. The reason for that was that there were a lot of basically city-states or not necessarily massive countries that were rivaled with each other, and it pushed all of these nations to innovate the lack of massive swathes of land, the high density of population, and just the rivalry between pretty much all of these small little schnappledoops here caused them to innovate, to look back, to look forward, to see technology and a new way of thinking as the way to move forward, which is what essentially brought about the Renaissance as we know it today. There were a lot of different participants in that, including the Republic of Venice. As you see here, Venice is significantly smaller in 1337. Don't let that fool you though. Venice was actually quite strong. There was a pretty significant rivalry between the Venetian Republic and the Genoese Republic. When it came to landmass, both of them pretty much had equal amounts of land, and by land I pretty much mean ports here and there, trade cities here and there, and various degrees of islands, with the Venetians owning most of the islands around the Adriatic Sea, whilst the Genoese owning most of the islands around the western banks of the Italian peninsula. Then the Genoese also had a ton of cities or trade cities or colonies, whatever you want to call them, around the Black Sea, around the Eastern Mediterranean, as did the Venetians. And the 1300s is when there was a massive war between Venice and Genoa, with the result, as we probably know by now, the Venetians came up on top of that war and basically became the greater trade republic up until the point in which the Ottomans screwed everybody over by taking Constantinople, stopping essentially to a standstill the trade with from the Silk Road, and boosting up in essence Portugal, Castile, and everybody else in the west from the trade that these nations would uncover via the southern tips of Africa and from the New World, something that the Venetians, the Genoese, could not attain at the time because they were stuck in the Mediterranean and having to deal with the Ottomans. Florence was also a major center for banking, commerce, and even the arts. Some of the most interesting artworks came from this region actually, and they were very much known for their various banking institutes. I wouldn't be surprised if banking as an institution, which is going to be one of the initial institutions in EU5, is going to start in Florence or around this area. It was also governed by a council or a signoria, as we know it in EU4. We have the signoria, government reform tier 1 for some nations, right? And basically the wealthiest merchant or banking families in Florence ruled the country, the republic itself. Some of them you probably know, like the Medici, which 100 years later would be more about the front line compared to the 1300s. In the 1300s there was a lot more than just a few bigger ones. Eventually they did consolidate into a few bigger ones. However, in the north, the Duchy of Milan was ruled by Azzoni Visconti, which ruled from 1329 to 1339, and Milan was actually known in this particular period for its expansion in the area and for being one of the strongest, both economically and militarily speaking, nations in the northern parts of the Italian peninsula, eventually gobbling up Pavia, parts of Verona, Parma, and just spreading its influence massively over this region. Verona, as you would imagine, is pretty big in 1337. However, they would eventually fall prey to, in my opinion, bad diplomatics, which ended up with them losing most of their lands, well, technically all of their lands, to the Venetians and other adjacent little entities. In stark contrast to Milan is Savoy. Savoy was ruled by the House of Savoy, namely Aymon de Savoy, who ruled between 1329 and 1343, and he basically had a very different approach to expanding the borders of Savoy. He did it diplomatically through peaceful means, through diplomacy. He was not as militant as the Milanese were in this particular time frame. So it will be very interesting to see very different approaches to how both of these expand and consolidate their holdings in the northern parts of the Italian peninsula. Verona was in fact still technically a city-state state with most of its power centered around the city of Verona itself. Mastino II della Scala was the one in charge of this particular nation between 1329 and 1351, and he managed to expand the borders of Verona considerably. It was under Mastino that Padua and Vicenza would eventually be conquered by Verona before the downfall of Verona. But Verona should technically start in a war. It was the War of the League of Cognac, in which Venice pretty much kicked Verona's ass, and it started in 1336, so technically, and ended in 1339, so we should start the game with the war between Verona and Venice, if you ask me, if we are to be historically accurate. And I'm not sure if that's happening because I didn't read that in the dev diary themselves. Okay, now that we gave a little bit more of an overview of the political situation in Italy, let's go ahead and go through the rest of these images we have from the dev diary. Beautiful to see the two sides here between the Guelphs and the Ghibellines. Now let's go ahead through the locations. Pavia says there is an interesting density in Italy, especially in the north, where there are plenty of communes, the Italian city-states. You might have also noticed a bit different from previous Paradox Grand strategy games. Venice is not an island, but the location lands around the lagoon. We aren't 100% sure that this will be the final design, as we have a few ideas to try to keep its special position on an island inside the lagoon, whilst addressing the issues of it being too small to appear on the map. In this regards, we're open to feedback and ideas. I personally think, and again, this is just my idea, that despite this being really small, it should still be its own independent location within the province here. Because sure, it's small, but the reality is that this would provide defensive abilities for the Venetians in case of everything going down to schnapps, and it would also be accurate from a historical point of view, right? Most of the power base of Venice was within the island itself, whilst also, of course, the adjacent area having its own significance too. I do think that we should have two separate locations here, not one location with all of this. Sure, it's going to be really small, but maybe you can just bend the rules and make it a tiny bit bigger so you can represent everything within it. It's okay. I mean, come on. I think everybody would understand if we make a couple more pixels here just so we have a proper size for the Venetian island, don't we? What do you guys think? I'm actually curious about your opinion. Let me know in the comments and on the forums if you have time, of course. Going through the provincial map mode, we've got some pretty interesting provinces here. We got Venice, Friuli, Padua, Vicenza and Verona, Brescia, Monza, Bergamo, Cremona, Mantua, Milano. Yeah, it's fairly similar to how it looks in EU4 actually, with a few extra provinces, of course, because obviously it's a little bit of a bigger map, you know, technically about what, 10 times bigger than EU4's map is. So yeah, you could expect a few extra provinces here and there. Siena's pretty massive, however, and Florence, holy shit, they actually are massive. God damn. I also like how this says Terra di Bari and Terra d'Otranto. You also have some areas as the Principality of Citra, for example. So genuinely love the way that they portray the province names, that's for sure. When it comes to the terrain map mode, we've got a very varied terrain here compared to most of the previous maps we've seen from Tinto maps. We've got a lot of Mediterranean, but we also have subtropical, oceanic in certain areas, including Genoa, continental as well, cold, arid in a few areas as well, and subtropical as well, even more in the south, continental in the north. Mix that in with the topographic map, where we have so many mountains, plateaus, hills, and flatlands, and then also so many grasslands, farmlands, forests, everything. This is an actual delight to see. It's so varied and so unique. I absolutely love it. It's gonna make for some really interesting fights within this particular part of the world, and technically this is where most of the wars should be happening, because Italy was extremely bellicose, as we would say, right, in this particular time frame. Everybody was fighting everybody, essentially. The religious map mode also shows us that the religion, we didn't know what exactly it was, or at least I didn't know what exactly it was before. It is the Christiani religion, which is a different sect of Christianity within Bosnia itself. Should be some Bogomilists around there as well, though. Maybe they're just a minority, so it doesn't show because of that. And now the map you've all been waiting for. Be honest, this is the one you wanted to see, wasn't it? The culture map mode. So we will start from the north. Actually, let's start from the south. In the south, we've got Tunisian, which we can see here. This is Asian, okay? We've got Kabylian over here. We've got Zenati, and I guess this would be Algerian or something of the sorts. Then we have in Sardinia, you guessed it, Sardinian, with the north having a little bit of Corsican, and Corsican itself being separate from Sardinian, and there being a lot of mixture in between where the border areas are. Sicilian itself is predominant in Sicily, with a little bit of Neapolitan Neapolitan here as well. We also have Albanians and Greeks at around the southern bits of Italy, of course. This, I would assume, is the Greek minority within the Kingdom of Naples, alongside Sicilian and Albanian as well should be here. A few other minorities here and there, and mostly it's just Neapolitan within the Kingdom of Naples itself. Then in the Papal States, we've got Umbrian with slight bits of Neapolitan towards the southern areas. I like to see that they do depict the fact that wherever there's a border between two separate cultures, it's not just, oh, from this moment on, everybody's that culture, from that moment on, everybody's that culture. No, you have the intermittent layer where you see that a lot of mixture between the two would happen, and in some cases, even new cultures would get formed. I'm not sure if hybridization, which is a CK3 mechanic, is a feature in EU5, but I would personally love to see that as a feature. What do you think about that? Curious what you think. Then we also have classic Tuscans over here, and Emilian, and essentially the province of Emilia-Romagna as we know it in EU4, Ligurian around the Genoese bits, Piemontese in the Piedmont area, Lombard in the former Kingdom of Lombardy, Center, or the Duchy of Milan as it is in 1337. Then we've got Venetians in Verona, Venice itself, and Padua, and we also have Friulian. Dalmatian is significantly more Dalmatians around. We've got the Istrian Peninsula here with majority Dalmatians. Most of the islands here also have majority Dalmatian. You guys probably know this already, but I'm just gonna make sure that in case you didn't know, you're gonna know after. Dalmatian is actually an extinct language today. It was essentially a Latin language, very similar to Eastern Romance languages, albeit I would personally say that Dalmatian was the middle between the Italian dialects and the Eastern Romance dialects. Antonio Udaina was the last speaker of Dalmatian, and he passed away in 1898. And I'm gonna let you be the judge of this, both Italian people watching this and Romanian people. I'm gonna count to 5 in Dalmatian, and I'll let you tell me if it sounds more similar to Italian or Romanian, or if it's just freaking super similar to both, okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's almost identical to Romanian. Only one word is slightly different. The other ones are literally exactly the same. In essence, Dalmatians were the last of the Latin-speaking people that existed in the Balkans, well, in the southern parts of the Balkans, from the old Roman colonists that eventually got replaced by the Slavs that migrated from Slavland or whatever the schnapp they came from, right? You totally came from Slavland, right? Slavic people? You know this, right? The famous Slavland on the planet Schmagadugs. Pretty common knowledge, I think. Speaking of Slavs, we've got a buttload of them in Slovene, Croatian, Bosnian. Then we got Hungarians in the north. We've got Southern Bavarian. Oh my god! So there's no Austrian. There is Southern and Northern Bavarian. Ooh-wee! Interesting. Also, Ladin is a portrait, which is beautiful again to see this portrait. And Romansh, one of the 4 official languages of Switzerland. Did you know that? You've got German, French, Italian, and Romansh as the 4 official languages of Switzerland. And yes, Romansh is basically spoken in a few villages at this point of Switzerland, but it's still one of the 4 official languages. You didn't know that, did you? You didn't freaking know. You better subscribe because you didn't know, did you? If you didn't know, you better subscribe. If you knew, you should still subscribe. Shut up, bro. Alright, we also have Arpitan here in the Savoy and as well as Southern Burgundy bits. And we have Alpine as well as Provençal. I want to know from the French people, do you think this is accurate or should it just be Provençal and then Arpitan? I don't know, I guess Alpine would have been the culture between the two that would have essentially taken up elements from both Provençal and from Arpitan, right? Overall, I give this particular cultural map mode a 10 out of 10. Out of all the cultural map modes I've seen so far from Tinto Maps, this is the best one, and the political one as well is the best. Now the markets, we've got 3 main markets at the start. We got Genoa, Venice, and Naples. That is very, very interesting. See how that's going to be as a dynamic unto itself. Pavia also mentions Naples, which was a very, very rich country in 1337, the wealthiest in the region, which is in stark contrast to modern Italy, isn't it? As usual, take into account that we don't script in the setup which locations belong to any market. They're automatically assigned to each market, and the the starting distribution is not final. It might change as we do tweaks to the market access calculation over time. So we might see 6 markets by the end of the development phase. Who's to say, right? Population wise, Naples has 2.289 million, Sicily 700,000, close to a million in the Papal States, close to a million to Milan, Verona almost 900,000, 3 point something million in Hungary, and pretty much confirmed at this point 1.3 million in Austria itself, 366 in Florence, which, as I said earlier, it is one of the bigger, more influential areas in Italy at the time. Altogether, there were roughly 10.5 million population in the Italian region in 1337. Also, Italy is one of the earliest areas hit by the Black Plague, so I think you could blame the Venetians and the Genoese for bringing it, because they're the ones that brought it with their trade, you know. Them Genoese colonies next to the Great Horde did not help, that's for sure. Now, let's also go ahead and check the raw materials map mode, see if we have anything interesting here. We do have some rice, apparently, in the north, out of all things. As you would expect, we've got most of the metals in the mountain, so we've got iron, we've got lead, we've got tons of gold, surprisingly. 1 gold province here. Gems, marble. Marble is actually pretty Italian, I'd say. One of the reasons why half the Roman Empire was built with marble is because it was in such massive abundance in the northern parts of Italy, especially around Milan and so on. This is actually the first time we see marble, because I don't remember seeing marble in any of the other raw material map modes. We also have silk. I'm not sure if this is Genoa or Genoa adjacent. It might be Genoa, though. I'm assuming the Genoese managed to bring silk from the Silk Road, right? We also have silk in Venice, for that matter. Again, those sneaky traders taking silkworms and putting them in their butts so they can escape the silk checking patrols, right? Totally happened. I watched it in Marco Polo series. I also see silver over here. I think this is the first time I see silver also, or maybe we saw silver in Bohemia, I'm not sure. A little bit of coal right next to some more marble and lead as well. More lead around Pisa somewhere. Actually, a lot of freaking raw materials around the Florentine area. Holy schnapps. And more marble too. More silk. 1, 2, 3 more silk producing provinces in the central part around Florence and around, what is this, Ferrara or something? Mantua? Not surprised, quite a little bit of olives. The Italians have been known to produce olives as much as the Greeks have. Stone, alum, wine, fiber crops. More alum, more wine. I'd say that Italy's got a buttload of good raw materials, actually. More silk in the south here in Calabria, and even more silk in Sicily itself, which has sugar. Is that the first time I see sugar? I don't think I've seen sugar before. There's a lot of salt pepper too, which is going to be great for gunpowder production, which we probably know by now is going to be one of the trade goods. I see gems in Tunis, which is basically the only reason you need to just burn the schnapps and salt the shit out of it and take their gems and go back to Italy. Am I right? Am I right, Italia boos? Look, they have dyes. Clearly they're meant to die since they got 2 dye provinces. Mercury. Holy shit. I didn't know they can fit an entire planet over here. Ludi, it's actually another planet. Shut up, okay? Shut the hell up. Sardinia is pretty good when it comes down to raw materials. We've got lead, iron, tin, silver right next to one another here, albeit it is divided between 2 separate countries, to be fair. This was one of the more enjoyable areas to discuss because I really like the Italian peninsula in 1337 and the history in Italy in general. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Love you very much. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.